Welcome to the MovieLabs 2030 Vision series, featuring fireside chats from the leading voices across the media and entertainment industry. Today, I'm talking with Matt Sivertson, Vice President and Chief Architect, Media and Entertainment at Autodesk. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Rich. Really glad to be here.
How long have you been at Autodesk? It's not that long. I think we met like shortly after you came in a couple of years ago. Is that right?
About a year and a half now. Yeah. So I started December of 2021, I think. And then I was, one of the first things I did was join you for the MovieLabs talk in Palm Springs.
Yeah. Remind me, what's your background? You didn't come from the media and entertainment industry, did you?
Sort of yes and sort of no. So the early part of my career was in video games. So if you count that as media and entertainment, then yes. Sure. And I'm an amateur filmmaker, so I've always been interested there. But no, most of my career has been in building software platforms. So that's kind of why I was recruited into Autodesk. Was my media and entertainment, background was useful there, but it was really about building software platforms because that's really what Autodesk wanted to do for the film and entertainment industry.
Yeah, perfect background. So especially as these industries are and the way we make content now is blending a little bit. So very, very good.
Absolutely.
Remind me, and I know we've talked about this, but I think you have a pretty interesting story of how you first heard about the 2030 vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that the 2030 vision is partly responsible for me being at Autodesk. So when I started speaking to Diana Colella, who runs media and entertainment for Autodesk about this role, she actually sent me the 2030 vision as sort of saying, this is what we want to do. We're not exactly sure how we're going to go about doing it, but this is the vision for not just Autodesk, but for the industry. And I read through it. I was on a plane and I actually just read through it. And I was like, yeah, this is absolutely how things should work. And so from there, I got really excited about the role, started speaking more to Diana, and the rest is history. Yeah, that's how I joined.
Wow, that's awesome. So obviously very aligned on where we would like to see the industry go for media creation. Can you tell me so if this is an aligned strategy, then how is it impacting the product roadmap?
In quite a few ways. I mean, I think there's some stuff that we're doing that is very much about the 2030 vision in terms of like bringing all the data together, trying to move workflows to the cloud, trying to increase collaboration between different companies. And so there's some things that we're doing there around building, for example, asset management capabilities, which is a little bit different than what we're usually doing at Autodesk in the past. But I think there's actually some more interesting, once you kind of put that stuff in place, the other way it's impacting our product roadmap is if you think about our products like a Maya or a ShotGrid or different products that are used in film production pipelines today, we're starting to envision those not as sort of separated applications, but applications that would then be connected to these cloud data streams. And so how do you reimagine the way that those applications should present themselves in a world where you're connected to this live data stream and not this sort of isolated application where data moves in and moves out as controlled by the user. So the more we move towards that world of connected data and everything is in the cloud all the time and the user doesn't have to worry about where the data is, the more these applications start to think about putting the work in the context of all the other data that's available.
Right. So part of the vision, we start with this, what we call a cloud foundation, where we have, 10 principles in the vision. The first 3 or 4, maybe even 5 are really about not just shifting and moving data to the cloud, but like changing the way we do things and leveraging the power of the cloud. So we start with principle 1, all assets go straight to the cloud and they need not move. And then principle 2, applications come to the media. We know these are challenging, these principles to implement, but we also know they're really foundational. How do you look at achieving these principles, in particular principle 2, bringing the applications to the media?
Yes, I think this is when we started to break down the 2030 vision and plan out how we see things going. I think we kind of realized that the vision itself of like, hey, the data goes to the cloud and doesn't move and the applications move to the data is an end state, but we might actually need some interim states because it's just not the way that, a lot of artists and companies are working today. And so there's this big leap between those two things. So the first step for us is really, I talked about, we're working on these asset management capabilities as part of our software platform. The first step for us is really make it so that people don't care where the data is actually, because the system is handling it for you. So that's what we want to do with asset management, is going into existing workflows that customers are working with today, abstract away where all the data is and all the different formats and things that need to be adjusted in order to do different workflows, and say, let the artist just open their task, and then behind the scenes, the system should actually do whatever is needed. If it needs to move data, it will move data. If it doesn't need to move data, it doesn't have to move the data, and it'll get it there in the right format. Because at that point, you're out of this position we're in today where everybody is very concerned with where the data is. And once you've got it to the point where they don't know even necessarily where the data is, then you can start to say, okay, behind the scenes, we can start to move some stuff around, and we can make it so that you don't actually have to move the data, and potentially bring the capabilities to the data itself.
Yeah, we can definitely see some efficiency when we stop moving these files all over the place. Obviously, these changes are going to take some time. What do you think it's going to take, the different stages until we get to, to get to that point where file movement's really just for, performance or for optimization? We just don't need to be shipping files all over the place. What do you think needs to happen ultimately to get there?
It's a pretty big step, I think, for the industry, because it sort of implies that almost everybody has a cloud agnostic multi-cloud strategy. And so, again, I think the first step is really making sure that we're delivering on the value of the efficiencies that we're trying to deliver for customers, even if in the interim the data does move a little bit. Because once we've got that value delivered, then I think you can start to say, based on these efficiencies, there's a lot more room for making sure that all of the capabilities are cloud agnostic. Whereas I think if you start from a position where everything has to be cloud agnostic from the beginning, all of a sudden companies have to operate in many different clouds, which is, costly in terms of like deployment and operations and monitoring. And the first step we really want to do is get the customer value out there. So once we've got that, I think there's going to be a lot more room for making sure that we can, do the harder work of making sure we can support multi-cloud. But it's, it is one of the harder, I think, goals that we're trying to achieve with the 2030 vision, because it is so different than the way we work today. So we're always looking for steps we can take.
It's not a lift and shift. It's really a paradigm shift. It's a change in how we're doing things. It really ripples all the way through all the workflows. I think the important thing too that you mentioned is you're already talking multi-cloud. I didn't bring up multi-cloud, but one of the things, the way we define cloud is public, private. There's this hybrid aspect of that. And we don't think that's changing. We're already living in a multi-cloud world. Not everyone's on the same cloud. Not everything is in the cloud. And so as that optimizes over time, I think your approach of abstracting where things are is a good first step. And then ultimately we become more and more cloud aware, and we take advantage of what the cloud can offer. So I really like that. Yeah.
And I should also say, I'm big on the expression, don't make the perfect the enemy of the good, right? So we have to make progress, and there's a final point where the data really never moves and all of the capabilities go to the data. But one thing we're working really hard on right now is, even if we don't have that full end state achievable right now, though we're not multi-cloud right now, we are working really hard on supporting federated storage for all of the hard assets, because we know that there's lots of good reasons why customers want their data in a particular place, either a particular cloud because they've got some sort of business arrangement, or in their own sort of data centers. So we've sort of abstracted and separated out all the metadata and the graphs that sort of connect the data and add all the richness to it that are going to enable these workflows from where the assets actually live, so that we can support all these different locations that customers want. And so that's sort of like, I guess you could say, a semi-multi-cloud, because the hard assets can be sort of anywhere, even if we haven't yet gotten all of our capabilities to be completely multi-cloud.
Once you break that tight coupling in asset management, it really does free you up to achieve some of these forward-looking workflows and really more interoperability. And you were talking about how just at Autodesk, you're looking at the different applications not as silos and having them all work more closely together. interoperability is a really important, focus for us. We're looking at, several dimensions of that. We did talk about infrastructure already, interoperability for data exchange, which I think I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're approaching that. And really for automation, on the control plane with, the ability to sort of build these workflows and compose them and recompose them more like they're building blocks that can just be assembled together. How are you guys looking at interoperability in this context?
Yeah, so as I said with Flow, which is the platform that we're building to try to achieve a lot of these 2030 vision results, interoperability is really the core central point of it. We want to organize all the data and centralize it so we can do all these things like the software-defined workflows and do things in a more efficient way. But the really important point here that we're trying to do is to move away from point-to-point connections between different applications and move more to more of a hub and spoke model, right? So we want all of these different applications connecting to data flows, not other applications. Because once you start connecting to other applications, it becomes fragile. If customers want to change a particular application in their workflow, there's additional work involved that breaks. But we actually don't really want one particular application to even be aware of what the adjacent applications are, because we want those to be able to change freely. So if you have this hub and spoke model, you're signed up to sort of like data notifications and things like that, not necessarily the application that generated that, because that's all being managed internally in the system.
And so that would be not just for your products, but for just anything that's used in the workflow?
Yeah, so a really big point that we've been driving, from the beginning is that what we're trying to achieve has to be open to everybody. So there's nothing that we're doing with Flow that is about trying to lock a customer into, say, a Maya or a ShotGrid, because we know that in order for this to work, you really have to connect all of the data in the filmmaking process for it to be as efficient as possible. And some customers will want to use, say, a Maya, and some might want to use Blender, and some might want to use, some of each in different cases. So this isn't about like closed systems. This is all about like open data access. And when we talk about Flow and asset management, it's not tied tightly to our applications. We're going to do integrations to all of our applications, of course, but it's just as important that we do integrations into other applications, that other companies can use the open APIs to integrate and get attached to those data flows as well.
Yeah, we agree. It's super important to minimize the need for all these bespoke implementations to connect things together, and we really need more common interfaces. One of the things that we recently published is this Ontology for media creation, which is a common data model, which we think underpins a lot of this work that you're describing. How are you guys looking at the ontology that we published?
So we're actually thrilled that you guys are publishing this ontology, because I kind of view with what we're trying to achieve, there's two parts to it. So the part that Autodesk should be focused on and with the platform is building an underlying data model, and we're building an entity component data model that can flex to various use cases. We don't necessarily want to be super opinionated, and we don't necessarily think we're the right people to be opinionated about what the ontology is. So when you guys build an ontology and you bring together all of the different players within the industry and say, this represents the best of our thinking about the ontology, that allows us to take our flexible data model, represent that ontology on top of it. And we're out of the business of, customers coming to us and saying, hey, I don't think this is the right ontology because it's, it's flexible. And so I think, MovieLabs is much better placed to build those ontologies, than Autodesk is. What we need to do is make sure that we can support the best ontology for the different use cases. And, there might be different ontologies for, say, feature films versus series versus commercials versus games. So from our perspective, we're trying to build the most flexible data model and the data model that allows us to enrich the data with the most metadata as possible.
Yeah. That allows data that's perhaps being created or captured upstream to be able to be used by downstream applications, and hopefully we don't lose all this data, which is one of the problems that we're facing today. You talked about the need to be open. Obviously, the ontology is an open and available. We're going to be making an open source. How are you guys embracing open source and open standards at Autodesk?
Well, I'll start with open standards because we're very much in favor. I think this works best when the standards are open and it's not locked away behind any particular company. So we do contribute to and invest in, USD and Open Color IO and Open Timeline IO and Material X. So we're very heavily invested in not only contributing to those standards, but integrating them deeply into our applications. So that is super important. Again, from the flexibility side of things, it's very important for us that we are not trying to tell customers how to work or what data formats they have to use. So we think about our asset management system and we think about our underlying data model. None of it is about telling you do or don't have to use USD, for example. Like customers can use whatever they want. Now, we think that it's going to be most advantageous over time that the industry moves towards as many open standards as possible so that the interoperability can be achieved. But we're not here to tell anybody exactly what data formats they should be using.
So interoperability, obviously it takes more than one company to be interoperable. We all have to be leaning in. What do you think that we need the rest of the industry to be doing to achieve more interoperable, composable workflows?
Well, I think the ontology you're building plays a huge part in it. I mean, the first thing that we have to do when we think about interoperability is focus on those exchange points, right? Where between different applications. I think there's probably room for a very crisp interoperability schema that allows a common language for everybody to speak, even if, there's a more detailed one, maybe at a lower level that represents a customer's workflow in a little bit more tailored way. But the more we can get to a common schema where everybody knows what it is, people are always going to have their opinions, right?
Even if you're mapping to it. Yeah.
Even if you're mapping to it, right? Like ideally over time you don't. And I think over time what will happen is these schemas will become richer. Some of the workflows actually will become more and more standardized because as the data models get more standard and the schemas become more standard, there's potentially less and less value in having your own particular version of things. And so as those things become more standard, hopefully you won't have to map to them as much. Like maybe you're just extending off of it as opposed to mapping to it. But that really is where we want to get to, is where everybody is, speaking a language that is understood, even if, every company might have their own particular extensions or variants to it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Flow? You mentioned that a little bit earlier. Take me through what it's going to be like when that is available for your customers, for artists, for people, in a new workflow that's sort of powered by Flow. What does that look like?
Yeah, so really the way we see Flow as the central hub that brings all of the people working on a film together from sort of pre-production all the way through to post. It should connect all of the data. It should allow capabilities, whether they're built by Autodesk or by other companies, to connect into that data, to be able to operate on it, whether it's with a human or in an automated fashion, to allow for efficiencies by having software-defined workflows. I'm talking about some things that are going to be further out. I said the first step is sort of this connecting and managing the data.
Right.
But really being that central place where everybody can connect into and to operate on something that is bigger than just what they're doing. I think that's really the most important aspect of it is when we talk to customers today, a lot of them have delivered on some of these efficiencies, right? And so some of the customers are actually closer to these efficiencies that you describe in the MovieLabs vision than I would say the market can provide for them out of the box. But when we talk to customers, they tell us they actually don't want these large internal development teams to do these things. So we want sort of that, pipeline in a box or that production in a box to be what Flow is as a foundation. It's the thing that connects it all together. And again, it's not about every last piece of software that you use that's connected to Flow will be Autodesk, not by any means. There's many, many parts of the workflow that we're not in and that we will probably never be in. But the thing that connects it all together, that allows two different companies to build products that don't know anything about each other, but yet still benefit from the data and the richness of those different capabilities, and that allows artists to focus just on their art and nothing else. Nothing about where data comes from, where it goes, what's going to be done with it on the next step, what has to happen with the next task, all of that stuff, all of that, glue that makes a pipeline efficient is what we want Flow to be. And, over time, we'll have more and more capabilities that are on the cloud. You talk about this idea that data will, stay in one place and capabilities will move to the cloud. We think more and more of that can happen. We can leverage cloud compute for a lot of different things that are, currently potentially done on just an artist machine right now. But at its fundamental level, we want Flow to be the hub.
Well, that sounds really interesting. I'm curious though, you talk about a central hub for all the data. Um, how would it work if there's other hubs of data? I don't know that how easy it's going to be to have everything in one place. So how would it work if there was, multiple hubs, a hub and spoke model? How would that actually work?
Yeah, this is a great question. And this is exactly why we talk about federated data being so important, and where the actual assets live is not necessarily going to be, controlled by Autodesk. We want the customers to choose where that data lives for the hard data, for the hard assets. When we talk about the centralized data, what we really want is this layer on top of it that Autodesk will manage, that connects it all together, that adds the metadata, that allows you to do the smart queries. So it's not about bringing all the data into Autodesk data centers by any means. There's lots of reasons why customers want their data where they want it. And we need to be able to connect to data wherever it exists. But what we do want is if there's data that's involved in the production of a film, we want to be able to know where to get it, right? We want an artist to be able to say, I need this data, help bring it to me, whether that's in an Autodesk data center or not. So that's one really important aspect of it. The other aspect is just, with the nature of filmmaking and how it works, it's very unlikely that there's going to be one graph that connects it all, that everybody is simultaneously working in. There's going to be graphs that connect to graphs because there's going to be sort of studio graphs, and there will be vendor graphs, and there'll be all these different, sets of data with these seams that we need to make as seamless as possible for customers. But only by having the data organized on both sides of those seams can you actually do these automated connections and these workflows that move across it. So really, really great question, because there is not going to be any one central place where all customers put all their data all the time. It's not going to happen, and we have to live with that.
Yeah, and then we do think that the common ontology for media creation can help with those seams, be a common data exchange. Because to your earlier point, we want to have less bespoke integrations and have more of a common model. And the ontology understands all the relationships between all the different assets and participants, tasks within a workflow. So that can be really powerful and help connect all those things together, like you said, all the different graphs.
Exactly. Like the common ontology that allows for just common understanding of, what is a shot? What do we mean when we talk about a character? Those different kinds of things. Even if there's a graph on, somebody else's server that we need to connect to in order to get to it, the common ontology gives us that language to be able to do that in a logical way.
Yeah, for sure. When we started out, you talked about the need to sort of change some of these things over time. We're not going to be able to just snap to the end state. And we're looking at how we're doing against the 2030 vision. It's 2023. We have seen some really great progress. We have a showcase that has a whole library that we're building of case studies that are putting these principles into practice today, and we're going to continue to do that. But we're also very much looking at identifying and socializing the gaps, the things that, the space between where we are today and where we need to get to for the 2030 vision. What are you focused on as sort of the biggest gaps that need to be dealt with? What are the things that you're trying to close?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest gap for us is really this idea around data management and connecting all of the data. If you think about all the ways that we're trying to drive different efficiencies, they all sort of presume that the data is connected and organized. Mm-hmm. And so and it's not. It's completely not, right? And so, I think once we do that, actually, so it's very important that the data is open, first of all, and that anybody can sort of access it, that the customer grants access to. But it's really important that it gets organized and connected, because I think it will dramatically actually affect the efficiency of the artist. So if I'm an animator and I'm assigned a shot, any information throughout the film production pipeline that has been produced, or any data that's been produced that might be relevant to my shot, should be at my fingertips. I should be able to get a LiDAR scan of the set that day for that particular scene, or if there's like a costumer's photo of the costume and I'm trying to, animate that and see that, I should be able to get that in an instant because it's actually presented to me. And so those are all things that can only happen once the data is managed. Once it's managed, then you can sort of, and connected, then you can sort of think about like, hey, the system can actually get smarter. I can proactively think about putting data in front of you as opposed to you having to go search for it. I can start to think about doing machine learning on top of it. But really, none of that stuff can happen. You talk about like automated software-defined workflows, like none of that stuff can happen until the data is actually all connected and managed, because there's still going to be all these pieces of glue that would have to be put together by somebody to say, because it wouldn't be in the system until it's connected, that this data actually represents a connection to this data in this way. So once it's all connected and managed, that's where those efficiencies can really start to come in.
Yeah, we definitely agree. I think that's one of the reasons why we focused right away on the ontology and making that available, because we thought that was really just one of the key components that's going to sort of make interoperability happen, hopefully fuel that. The other thing I noticed that you mentioned was not only this sort of evolution and change over time, but also, you need to deliver the value to your customers in the new ways of doing things and make it so that they don't feel the need to hold on to some ways that they're doing things today that may be less efficient, which sounds to me a lot like change management. And so clearly you're thinking about this as you're, looking to roll out new ways to do things, new features. Rather hear it in your words. So how are you looking at change management? It definitely feels like it's one of the core things that's part of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that actually the change management and sort of the people management as we go through this transition is probably at least as difficult as any of the technical problems, because it's very difficult to get people who are used to working a certain way, get them used to trying something new, particularly in a very sort of deadline focused business like film,
For sure.
where there's some hesitance to try out new things if they can't be guaranteed of it. So I think for me, this is why actually the 2030 vision is so important, because you need a goal, you need a vision that people are aligned on that makes it worth the transition. If it was, some sort of like small incremental gains, you could see studios saying like, well, yeah, that sounds nice, but it's a little bit risky, so I'm not going to do it. So you need this big vision that actually fundamentally drives new workflows, more efficient workflows, and especially like allows the artist to focus on the art and not all the rest of the stuff that's involved in the pipeline and the data management. So I think that's absolutely huge. And this may not be what you actually meant by change, because I think you talk about like industry change management, but we see this internally even as we're trying to shift from this, disparate applications view of the world internally at Autodesk into this like cohesive ecosystem of which we're simply parts of at different points of the application. Right. And it's difficult for our employees to do that. And so we're really trying to drive home with them that it's like, look, it's okay to fail fast. It's okay to try things. And we're going to only be approximately right most of the time. And so I think this is something when we think about change management, the industry really has to embrace. We can't be afraid. We have to try things because we know it's worth it to get to the end vision. And a lot of things will work, a couple of things won't, and we'll pivot and we'll move forward. But we can't not do it just because we're afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does start with each of us, and then working with, your customers, working with, other parts of the industry. And it has to be something that we're thinking about and doing as we're making the technology changes, not at the end when it's like, okay, everything's ready to go, try this. It just doesn't work that way. So totally agree there. I think on the, as we looked at interoperability, we thought, boy, we're going to really need a common data model and common data exchange. And so we worked on the ontology, and we were sort of looking at other things that are going to be real core prerequisites in order for us to move to 2030. Another one is security. Yeah. We're not able to just do the same things that we did in the past. It's not going to work in the future. We can't rely solely on a perimeter for security when we're going to have a whole bunch of different companies and products and services all working together in a shared infrastructure in the cloud. So we need to move to a zero trust architecture. We published what we call CSAP, Common Security Architecture for Production. How are you guys looking at security as we move towards the 2030 vision?
Well, first I should say that like the principles that you've outlined in the CSAP, not relying on perimeter security, we're bought into that. And I think that's actually just, outside of even sort of any MovieLabs vision or industry sort of concerns, that's just good practice. If you're moving to the cloud, if you have customer data that needs to be protected, you need to limit blast radiuses, and you can't just rely on a perimeter, because if somebody does get in, you need to reduce that blast radius. Things like least privilege, like absolutely, we're totally embracing that. We're moving forward. I think, I keep coming back to this idea of more things are possible once you connect the data, because one of the things about security too is the easier it is to manage, the more secure things will be, because things won't get dropped on the floor. So when we start to think about connecting all this data and we start to think about least privilege, you can look at, well, if we can connect sort of like the task management data, for example, that we have in ShopGrid, and you're attaching that to sort of this centralized security mechanism of permissioning in an asset management system, you can start to get like really granular and say, well, this artist doesn't have access to this asset. This artist has access to this asset while they are assigned this task. And once they're no longer assigned to the task, they don't need it anymore. That's something that could be completely transparent in the future, that nobody has to do any work to do. It's just sort of an option that you select. I also think there's a lot of, in addition to the traditional, perimeter security and trying to keep bad actors out, security for us also involves like things like watermarking, things like access logs that are auditable, that you can track, that you know exactly where an asset is and who has it at any particular time. So we're really trying to think beyond sort of like the fundamentals of security into how can the data actually help us become more secure as an industry.
What you describe is one of the key benefits we think of the common security architecture for production, which is having the workflow drive the security. And then you can actually start to automate some of these things. And then also we talked a bit about interoperability, and we know it's really important that we can have policy-driven security and have all the different endpoints understand what the policy is intending, and then being able to implement it. So we think there's a big benefit in a common security architecture and that approach. And so I think the more we can embrace that as an industry, the more we can simplify it and also enable the scalability that it provides, where you might need to be really secure in some aspects of the workflow, and in other aspects, maybe you can turn that security dial down, because it's all about your risk profile. So I think that's really important, what you had said about having that workflow. It already knows what the next thing needs to be done. Let's let the security be driven by that and start automating this.
Yeah, 100%. We don't want artists opening assets. We want them opening tasks, right? Like the more we can abstract away to the intent, the more we can automate that sort of security posture.
Yeah, for sure. And that also makes things much more easy to manage, and then much more efficient, because now you're not spending time looking for something or getting access to something. It's already there waiting for you to go. You already have the permissions you need to go do your work. And like you said, when you're done, it all gets cleaned up, and we're secure. So I wanted to just end on a topic that I think is super important, because we at MovieLabs, we represent the 5 major motion picture studios. We've been working together with companies like Autodesk and the cloud companies all across the industry to try and drive this vision and to achieve it. But it takes everyone leaning in. As you said, we need everybody to do their part and embrace the open and embrace interoperability. So if there's something that you could say to advise companies out there that are looking to help, join this journey to 2030, what would you suggest? What are some of the, what's some advice you could give somebody out there that really wants to achieve this vision?
I think the first thing is to just recognize this is an industry problem that we only solve by working together. And we can't be defensive. We can't be closed off. We need to embrace openness, whether it's in the standards or in API access. And, companies that might have thought of themselves as competitors in the past, if you take that customer first lens about a studio that's trying to put together a pipeline that actually produces a film, we need to be able to work together, and we can't actually block each other's access. And we need to look at it as an opportunity. I think the biggest thing for me, and again, I keep coming back to this idea of like, once the data is centrally organized and managed, the value proposition will shift from like, hey, I've got my own little slice of the workflow that I need to defend, to if I connect my slice of the workflow to this data stream that's going on, I give a little and I get a lot, right? Like I pull down my data and I give back my data that I'm working on into this open environment. But what I have access to is all the rest of the data that is in the data stream for the entire workflow. And so by doing that, by just being open and saying like, I'm going to allow my customers to work the way that they want to work, I think that's very important. None of this is about telling customers how they want to work. It's about enabling them to work the way they want to work with the tools that they want to work on, and seeing it as an opportunity with the access to the data. That's how we need to embrace this. And then it's may the best tool win, right? Like you still need to make your tool the best. You can't do it by lock-in. And that's kind of how we look at it when we think about this platform that we're building. This is something for the industry, and none of it is about locking in any of our products. We want you to use our products because they solve the task the best, not because you have to use it because you're using these other things. That's never going to work. So the more we can work together, the more we can talk about opportunities, talk to our customers about workflows that span products that we don't necessarily build. I think that's the only way to move forward.
So embrace open and work together. Great advice, and words we certainly live by. Thank you, Matt, so much for joining me today. Really appreciate your insights and your leadership here. We're really excited for what you guys are doing, how you've embraced the vision, and looking to see how that manifests in your product suite as we move forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rich, and thanks to MovieLabs for pushing the industries, sometimes kicking and screaming, but pushing us all forward and giving us this common vision that we can all work on together.
Thanks for watching the MovieLabs 2030 Vision series. For more information about the MovieLabs 2030 Vision, including additional white papers, videos, blogs, architectures, and specifications, please check out our website at movielabs.com, and be sure to subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Thanks.